we have this list of questions. I believe we're going to save the extensive reading questions for another day. But why don't we get started with the first one on the list? How do you manage mixed level reading? And I think, at least in my program, we are very mixed right now because we're so small. We've lost a lot of enrollment, and so we're kind of having to shrink our levels down. And the students are very, they're all over the board in terms of proficiency. So that would be the first.
How about for some of the rest of you, how do you manage those mixed level, proficiency level classes when it comes to specifically teaching reading?
Well, I do open-ended questions that can be answered at various levels. So some students might be able to give a more comprehensive answer, but other students might have to give a simpler answer.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, sometimes I would put them into groups when we're doing reading. So then I would know the level of the students before. So I would, maybe put one stronger student with a group of less, students that don't have so much, they're weaker. So then this person can actually help them understand. And I was, it's not a long time ago, but almost like 10 years ago, I was very much telling my students that they can use L1, it's okay. Although the program that I was working at the time was very much, don't use Arabic, don't use Arabic. I don't speak Arabic, but, if it was helpful for the students, especially the weaker ones, I would allow them to talk about the reading in their native language, and then they can, understand the reading more with the help of the stronger students.
Yes, Janice.
Hi, I'm a K-12 person, and a lot of times we have mixed levels in our room, and I do a lot of read aloud with each student following along in their own book. And those very, very beginners, I usually try to find a graphic novel version of the book we're reading so they can follow the pictures. And that helps them understand what's going on. And I've had really good success with kids because they've got to want to read in K-12 because they're just beginning to read in a language that's not their first language. We don't have bilingual in Mississippi, and so there are too many languages. We don't have enough staff that's bilingual. So that's why we are English only. Not because in fact, I will find the book in this child's language if I can, so they can understand. But I think beginning with the foundation of wanting to read is important for my students.
Yeah, and having that initial desire or motivation to want to read, I think, is key, particularly when you're working with those multi-level classes.
I think one thing that sort of harkens back to Neil is giving students a little bit of choice, part of the motivation process. And can you build in a few simple choices for people at different skills within the same classroom?
I've also found it helpful to create for some of the reading passages that we use with our L2 students, reading guides, but create maybe the same guide, but create one that has more blank spaces for the advanced students and fewer blank spaces for the weaker students, so everyone can be reading the same text. And they finish at about the same time. But the stronger students have a more demanding task while they're reading through the text.
How much time does it take you, Fredricka, to prepare 3 different reading guides in order to accommodate 3 general proficiency levels?
That's a good question. I think you really start with one reading guide that has all the questions and all the parts, and then you keep taking things out. So if there's an A, B, and C, you know, what are the three main ideas? You type them in. And then for the intermediate level, for the middle level students, you give them 2 answers. For this, for the weak readers, no, for the strong readers, no answers. For the weakest readers, 1 answer. So if you start with a complete reading guide that has all the answers, then you just subtract, take away things that would require the stronger students to have to do more work.
That is a brilliant idea.
Thank you. Why, do you really create 3 different guides?
Well, actually, the idea that I've been working with recently, I've been going to like Voice of America and taking the transcript of one of their talks, and then I've been using ER Central, their online graded reader, and inserting the text and then creating 3 different versions of the same topic so that the weaker students have something that's at their readability level, and then a middle level and a higher level. And I typically start with the middle level and make sure that that passage works well for the mid group. And then I take it down a couple of notches on ER Central and get the vocabulary load to 95%, and then go up a couple of levels on ER Central and get the vocabulary level at 95%.
Could you do the same thing with Tom Cobb's vocab profiler?
I think you could. I've just started to become much more familiar and fluent with ER Central. And there are resources in ER Central that are some passages that have already been developed at the various levels there. So you could pull some materials that are there as well. But I'm finding that taking a topic from a site like Voice of America and then building 3 versions of the same text so that we can engage in questions like, what's the main idea? What are some key vocabulary you need in this passage? Let's make some inferences.
Doreen, I believe you raised your hand.
Yes, thanks. It's not that I've tried all these things. So, you know, what works for most of the people most of the time. And I'm just going to add to it that I think when I have mixed groups, and even though I work with university students, many of them are very reluctant readers in English and have not had positive experiences. In fact, many of them don't seem to have really read. They've only translated small text. So, so I feel like I also have to really interest them in reading as its own, you know, activity and reward. So I try not to do actually a lot of reading where we must read the same text. And so I use a lot of materials where they may be reading different texts, but the fact is we still want to know the same kinds of things about a text, right? Main ideas, characters, development. So sometimes that is what brings the groups together, even though they may be talking about different texts. But I really have included a lot of various fluency activities, which allow me then to do a lot of, students are working at their own level. So they're working to improve themselves. They're not, you know, trying to meet a certain particular benchmark for the class as a whole. And that gives a lot of individual attention to them, so that sometimes then if we do need to read one text together, even though I have used Profiler, I haven't used ER Central, I've used Profiler more often. We'll just spend more time, maybe in groups again, as was stated, to get at some of those same kinds of questions that we ask about a text. But I give a lot of individual attention when it comes to fluency building and then independent reading with similar tasks.
Christy? You.
I did. I just wanted to unmute myself. It really depends. Like I've done some things like Janice just mentioned, the read aloud, but I use instead, there's a website by Sean Bean. He's done a lot of work like ESL conversations, breaking English news. And I like his website because he's already taken something real and broken it down to like 6 different levels. And they all have an audio component, and they already have built-in exercises and activities that you can expand upon. So, and I like to do that with both my, going on to just working on their English or their pathway students, both that works pretty well. And I also like News ELA. Have you guys heard of that?
Yeah.
Then I like it too, because, you can change the lexile level, which is nice. So everyone doesn't feel like they're not reading the same thing. And then if you wanted to keep going it electronically, they have some built-in questions already for you that are open-ended and some that are true false. And I like to just sometimes as a diagnostic, take something like that with different reading levels just to see where everybody's at in the classroom, and then help me plan the rest of the time, depending what my focus is. But one of the other things I'd like to do is I really like to do that whole, because then you can practice summarizing and paraphrasing, retell like in a jigsaw. So you be responsible for reading only a small section in the group, make sure the group understands, and then divide it into other parts and have everyone retell their part of the group. And I find that really works well, even for all the different readers, because then they're not so overwhelmed. They only have to do a small chunk. And another website that I like, and I don't know if you're familiar with, is Read.org. And it's more K through 12 than college. However, in my very beginner levels, like my level 1, who's a true beginner or a false beginner, I like to use it too, because again, it gives an interesting piece of reading that can be fiction or nonfiction, and it comes with some built-in questions, and it's kind of nice because it's academic-ish, but not so academic that they feel overwhelmed. So that's kind of like how I handle it.
Could I ask everybody who recommends a website to type it into the chat so that we can see the spelling, and you don't have to give us the website address, but just the name.
Yeah, Christy, I quickly typed in Breaking English News, and that looks like a fabulous site. They give you initially whether this is a harder, an easier, or a mid-level. And then even within easier, there's a level 0, level 1, level 2, level 3. And some great titles that are here that are popping up in today's latest news. So that's a great site to help us all be aware of.
Do you know this book? I don't know if it's backwards. Disrupting Thinking, and it has 3 big questions that you can ask for anything they read. What surprised you? What did the author think you already knew? And what challenged, changed, or confirmed your thinking? And I heard these authors are Kylene Beers and Robert Probst at International Literacy Convention this past year, and they have had fabulous success with children who don't like to read answering those questions, because what surprised you, anybody can answer that. And what did you have to know goes into background vocabulary. I had to know this word, whatever. And then what challenged or confirmed your thinking, they have to talk about it. And that is good for all of our students, all levels.
Thanks for sharing that resource, Janice.
I was thinking that all of these, maybe our newsletter editors already have the first entry with some of these useful websites with a short 1 to 2 sentence descriptor would be a fantastic resource for members of this intersection.
Taking notes.
Good.
Maybe we could go on to another question now.
I was just going to suggest that, Lynn.
Okay, and would you like to introduce the question, Neil?
Well, let's look at, Tom's video came on.
Yay. Hi, Tom.
Hi, Tom.
Good to physically see you there, my friend.
I had to restart my computer.
Okay, now I don't see the, okay, do you see the burning questions doc?
Oh, yes.
Okay, so let me just put this up for a second and have everyone look at this. We've got about another half hour here. Rather than go sequentially through the questions, is there one burning question there that you would like us to throw out for discussion?
Neil?
Yes.
So I do like the next question, and I get asked this a lot, and I think many of us get asked this. How do you integrate reading strategies into your reading courses? And partly,
Do you mean the second question or the second set?
topic. Yeah, the second topic, the one question. How do you integrate reading strategies into your reading courses? In part, I get this asked a lot, and so does Fredricka, because I think we both agree that independent reading strategies as exercises in course textbooks are not very useful. And really, it's how you work with a text that is the text in your textbook or that you bring that gives you the opportunity to develop the strategic thinking that students really have to have at some point if they're going to progress.
In terms of strategies, one of the things that Bill and Fredricka have taught me well is that rather than having a wide number, lots of strategies that are built into the book, every chapter has a different strategy, that we really ought to be thinking about the strategies that this group of students need, and then make sure that we're recycling a smaller number of strategies rather than just hitting lots of different strategies superficially, and allow the students time to develop in greater depth a fewer number of strategies.
And in line with that, what's very helpful is to make it very explicit with your students so that after you've done maybe incorporated strategies into whether it's a pre-reading or a post-reading task, that you ask your students, what did we do? Why did we do it? When did we do it? So it becomes part of their conscious thinking about reading, because strategies are deliberate steps that readers take to make sense of a text that's hard for them to read. And some teachers use strategies with texts that are too easy for their students. And of course, in any given reading class, we want to include readings that are easily accessible to motivate students and to help students build their reading fluency. But we also want to ask them to read texts that are more challenging for them, that will require realistically strategies to make sense. And so then it seems to me students should be able to talk about which strategies they used, when, for what purpose, and how it helped them understand the text.
Yeah, and I think that your last question there, how did it help them understand the text, is key to strategy instruction, because if the students don't see that connection between the use of this strategy actually resulted in my having higher comprehension and solving the reading challenge that I'm currently facing, then they'll never be able to automatize the strategies on their own and use them in effective ways that effective readers do naturally.
I'm curious how many people in our group today can actually put things on their classroom walls and leave them there, like the put strips of paper that actually have the name of the strategy that was used or the name of the strategies that were used, so that students have the vocabulary to talk about their strategy use. Can you put things on your classroom walls? Like, do you have bulletin boards, or do you have, Georgios, you can't? Could you bring in a piece of butcher paper and just, is there any place where like you could pin a poster on the wall while you're teaching, and and you keep adding the names of strategies. It's so helpful to give students the vocabulary to talk about it.
Well, right now, since we're all teaching by Zoom, it actually is easier because we can share the screen. We can send it to the students in the chat room. We can do a variety of things easier than actually in our physical classrooms at the university.
Good point. Good point. One of the benefits of being on Zoom. Okay.
Yeah, and we use Moodle. So whatever we do in class, then we just go and post everything, and then students actually have access to whatever we've done each and every day. Which in the past, I mean, I wouldn't do it, but now, because it's more interactive and students, even the class is recorded. So if the student asks for access to the class or misses a class, they can request access, and we can send them the class, the link to see it.
Some of the rest of you, how do you integrate the explicit instruction of strategies?
Sorry, I keep answering, but do you do think aloud, read aloud, where you're reading something and you come to a word and you say, now here's a word I may not know. What do I do to attack this word as you're in the middle of reading something? And it's sort of modeling what you want the student to do, and maybe write that on a chart or refer to it when you come to that same needed skill again.
That's a great suggestion, Janice, and an idea that popped into my head as you were sharing that ties back to the earlier discussion about multi-level classes. If you can get a student that's at a higher level of reading proficiency in your class to be the one to do the think aloud, talk aloud, or read aloud, think aloud, then the students are seeing their peers model that process rather than it always be the teacher.
I'm curious if people who teach at the university level have used the think aloud strategy. I've tried, but my students are all a little hesitant.
I use it all the time. Even with the teachers that I train, I will pause and I'll say, okay, you need to know what's going on in my brain right now with what we're doing. And I'll reveal that thought process and then say, this is the kind of thing that you've got to do when you're engaging with academic texts.
I think it's helpful with adult university learners to tell them, if you're going to move into like a think aloud while reading, tell them what you're going to do and why you're going to do it and what to pay attention to. So when you diverge from the text that you're reading, it's like, well, where is that? They know why all of a sudden you're using words that are not on the page. And so if they understand why you're doing this and you explain that this is what good readers do all the time, and you remind them how many pages they're going to be asked to read for their university classes soon when they're out of the language improvement program, they might pay more attention because they don't often believe that they're going to have to read 50 pages a night. When we ask them to read pages 17 to 90, in our textbook. So helpful to remind them about that.
Okay, I think Christy, who was first? Christy, I think you raised your hand first.
It doesn't matter. Just a couple ideas. I don't know if any of you is familiar with the, we all have Post-its, right? But there's actually big Post-its that you can actually stick to a wall. Mm-hmm. And right now, I just have a blank wall here. I could do that. But in my classroom, the Post-its come like a presentation stand thing, and I don't even need the stand. I just put them back in and they're very restickable. And so I usually go around carrying a thing. And I find that even with my advanced students, just having that visual reminder around the classroom is a good way for them. And then I can just redirect, that really helps a lot with the different specific strategy that I want them to work on or talk about. And I think to go back to what you were saying, Fredricka, about giving them a clue ahead of time to get them used to the idea of think aloud, share aloud. With the reading guides, I usually don't frame them as reading guides. I frame them as comprehension discussion questions. And then I tell them that we're going to have a discussion. And so you have some of the discussion questions ahead of time so that you are prepared to use it. And I make them rearrange the room. So it's not, it's trying to get them to be more like a round table discussion. And that really worked well. And then another time I actually hosted a round table with my more advanced students and had them like preview information on the LMS ahead of time and then participate in a Menti. Are you guys familiar with a Mentimeter?
Oh.
It's kind of like an interactive live poll feature that they can use on their phones at the same time, and had them rolling in questions as we were talking, so that kind of like what Neil's doing, I could answer their questions, but nobody was embarrassed because I didn't say who their name was, so they could ask the question they wanted to ask and ask each other that. So those are kind of ways that I do it explicitly. And then sometimes explicitly, I have like an agenda, and I say, and on the agenda, I list the explicit reading item, and I tell them, this is what we're going to be working on, and then the whole class, and then go from there. So that's kind of like some of the strategies that I use.
Oh, Doreen, you also raised your hand.
Well, I'm just going to say that over the years of teaching, I think I talk less and less about specific strategies because it's such a complex phenomenon, and I don't feel like they need to learn an entire vocabulary about strategies in addition to trying to figure out what the text means. But that doesn't mean that we aren't engaged in strategic reading or talking about it. So I find myself that it's hard for me to find a textbook that that I will use. Actually, rather I'll choose texts for students to read, and then I'll bring in the talk around dealing with difficult text. But I find I find myself more and more burdened by an entire vocabulary and some taxonomy, of strategies.
I'm actually glad, Doreen, that you brought that up, because one of the things that I emphasize with the undergrad students that I'm working with in a reading class right now is that not everyone in the field of second language teaching of reading agree on how to approach everything. I'm one that believes firmly that the explicit discussion and having that framework for discussion of strategies is valuable. And it's brilliant that there's someone that disagrees with my thinking.
Shall we move on?
There's not one way to do this. If there were, we would all be teaching exactly the same way. Let's look at, well, before I transition to the next question, is there anything else about explicit or implicit instruction of strategies that anyone wants to raise?
I think one of the reasons I think we both Fredricka and I like reading guides is because you get away from just questions or highlighting vocabulary, and you can display aspects of how the text itself is structured as a way to get them to be aware of what a writer is trying to do. And so that's why I think we like to pursue the idea of reading guides as a way to build strategic awareness and make them more strategic, because there are visual things you can include that go beyond what usually is in a textbook.
Would you or Fredricka be willing to share one of your reading guides with the group?
Sure. And how do we do that?
We'll take one of Alice Savage's texts.
How do we share that?
Well, I don't know how to share it, but you can certainly have the texts. One of the things that I've been thinking about is how do we make the class a little bit more relevant and engaging for students in the online format by creating purpose. So I don't like to use materials that just say we need to practice the reading strategy because you need to know the reading strategy.
Right.
I want to say I want to practice. You know, you have to give your opinion about this idea and you'll need to learn how to paraphrase this in order to support this main idea. So I find myself in this tension of I want to do a project in which they use the strategies to do something that makes them feel smarter, but I also want them to do lots and lots of reading. So the project, I want to bring in lots of different texts and then it gets big. But I think that students come away with more of a smile and a sense of accomplishment if they feel like the strategy has been purposeful rather than just practice in isolation.
Definitely. Alice,
So maybe the reading guides do help make that happen.
Alice, what I hear you saying really is that rather than a focus on practicing strategies, we look at, and Neil said this before, we think about our students' abilities, but we also look at the texts that we're asking them to read, and then we try to figure out what the purpose would be and what strategies would allow them to fulfill those purposes.
It all starts with the content. So then you're building around that. What strategies fit that content and what other texts can speak to the text you're starting with that give them something to process and produce and talk about. So it ends up being a little bit bigger than what I see in some books where you just read and then you have a choices and you click the main idea and that sort of thing. Because I think online, we have to do something that creates community and social learning opportunities.
Well said, Alice. Anything else about strategic reading or strategy instruction?
Only that it seems to me that as teachers who want our students to become better readers, whether it's in Janice's elementary school classrooms or Lynn's university classes, that we should all make a commitment to not teaching strategies, but rather training strategic readers. I think there's a very big difference between teaching strategies and training strategic readers who can eventually, over time with a lot of practice, use some of these strategies when they need them autonomously.
Good distinction to make between strategy instruction and strategic reading.
Strategic reader training, which is different than strategic reading, right? So there's teaching strategies, there is, now I've forgotten, there's training strategic readers and there is strategic reading, which are three different things, I think.
Christine raised her hand, but now I don't see her.
Hi, I'm right here.
Oh, okay.
I have a question for the group. There is a textbook, I don't know if you're familiar with Making Connections by Cambridge University Press. And you know, that one has, in the beginning of the chapter, they have a strategy for the students to read about and practice. And then in the reading text, there are marginal notes for the students that kind of gear them towards some of those strategies and, you know, point them out, and they have to answer questions, which is really great practice. So they're doing a lot of practicing. But the one thing I've asked teachers about this, you know, that there's maybe 3 readings in the chapter, but they're all the same style where you know, there's marginal notes where the students have to stop and then answer the question, and it's related to whatever strategies they had been studying. But I think that should be one of those readings, the last one maybe, should have been a clean one, where without any marginal notes, and students then practice, you know, on some of those, finding where they can use some of those strategies. And I've asked that to teachers if they can come up with another text that doesn't have that just a clean article. And they said, yeah, but the problem is that then they have to search around the internet to try and find a reading that's going to be related to the topic. So I don't know, what do you think? Do you think that that would be a good idea though for them to try and find a resource?
That's my textbook that I use. And in my program, we like the book because it's pretty academically focused, but to me, half of the fun of being a reading teacher is going out and finding outside things for them to read. So I come, yeah, sometimes it takes a lot of time, but that's what I enjoy, finding things that I think the students would be interested in. That's something has some connection to what we read in the textbook, but might be a little more timely, or might provoke a little more discussion from the student.
I like Christine's idea of they're getting good scaffolding with the textbook and those marginal notes. But at some point, the students need to transition from the scaffolded help that they're getting in the textbook to the unscaffolded, independent reading, where maybe they're now inserting their marginal notes on how they are using the strategy. So Christine, at least from my perspective, your question is great, because I see great value in transitioning to that independent reading that is not, does not have the comments in the margin. The challenge then comes back to what Lynn just raised, of maybe you as the individual teacher, knowing your students, can then find something that's somewhat related to the topic that they've been practicing in the textbook, and find something more current, recent, and then give them the opportunity to insert their own marginal notes of how they're using that strategy.
If there are more than, these days, many of our programs are getting smaller, but if there are multiple sections of a given course using the same textbook, it seems that teachers could divide and conquer, and I'll find a supplementary text. I was thinking, Christine, in your program, maybe you could find a supplementary text for chapters 1 and 2 and making connections, and another teacher could look for a supplementary text that's related in content for chapters 3 and 4, something like that, just to divide and conquer, because it is time consuming.
Christy, you raised your hand?
I did. I had another idea. Maybe this might be a good opportunity for the students to find. Like if we give them the list of some of those websites that we were talking about earlier that we know have a different breakdown of reading level, maybe this might be an opportunity for the students to find a reading that's similar around the topic, and then perhaps make it more of a project where they use the strategic reading skills and being able to share it with the other people. I mean, it could be something like a summative assignment where they have to find the reading material, they have to maybe break it down and lead it for the rest of the class. So then they're practicing multiple skills at the same time, and it's on a topic they're already familiar with. Maybe that might be something to do.
Doreen?
I was just going to add on the sharing the load feature. If you have a resource room or access to other books, other published materials that would be taught at the same level. In the past, I used to keep folders full of just copied and cited readings from other textbooks, and just kept them in folders on these topics. So basically, if this is my text, then I would go to folders where I had been collecting readings like that, just by using other resources available. And that didn't require a lot of internet searching, and it was about the same proficiency level.
I should jump in and say that we're getting close to 4 o'clock. We've got it's about 4 o'clock my time, 7 minutes until the hour. So could we maybe address one last burning question?
Here's the list of burning questions again. Is there one here on the list that you would like to nominate for our last round of discussion today?
Can we talk a little bit about motivation, the motivation for reading, if people are interested?
Yes.
So the question that is directly tied here, how do I help students understand that reading is essential to the development of their academic reading? What do you do to make those motivational connections for your students?
You know, one thing you can do, if it's possible, is to bring in a few past students who are actually in an environment where they are being asked to read a number of resources, and they might even feel a little pressure because there's too much to read, and have them talk about why it's nonetheless still important for trying to read as much as you can and work through the information, because that's what people are trying to learn. Anyway, just a thought.
Other students who have gone through your program and are at the point where your current students want to end up at is a really, really powerful motivator.
In part because students, when we tell them how much they're going to read, they don't believe us. But when they see someone who is exactly what you said, Neil, in a place where they would like to be within a semester or a year, they're more likely to believe a peer than one of us, sadly, but true.
Yelena,
I am not sure how to volunteer to.
That's fine.
Is this fine? Okay. Just this morning, as I usually, you know, when I get up, I start looking through the news feed, and I came across an article that talks about how to raise good readers, and the strategies that are shared in this reading can so nicely apply to the teaching context. And one of the suggestions this text gives is make the choice to read easy. Apparently, any extensive reading would be considered a leisure activity. And students are not necessarily choosing whether they want to read or not to read. They're choosing whether they want to eat, snack, chat with a peer, meet with a peer. So the suggestion was make them choose reading over other leisure activities. And one way to do that is to give them the readings, find the material that would be interesting to them, having done the needs analysis previously. Find the texts that are at their reading level, so there wouldn't be any factors that prevent them from holding that text, embracing it, and engaging with it. So I think I'm going to take this suggestion up with my own kids, as well as with the students that I work with.
Elena, could you post something in the chat box that will help direct us to that article that you read this morning?
Oh, absolutely. Let me get to it using my computer. I have it currently on my phone. Thank you.
Okay.
Neil, before you continue, I want to say Margie, she put in the chat box regarding perusal, and she wanted to ask everyone if perusal is something that other people use, because she just found out that it's integratable with Canvas and other MLSs. So I'm not sure if anyone else is familiar with this.
I am not. I think I saw Doreen affirming that she had.
Yeah, but I did not know it could be integrated into Canvas, which would be a really good thing since that's the LMS that we're using.
So what is perusal?
It's basically a server that allows students to get, it's like for e-reading. And so there's a menu that you can choose easily. just perusal, P-R-E, well, she's got it in the chat. It's
Yeah.
perusall.com.
And it
Excellent.
has 2 L's.
I'm going to check that out when we're done.
Yeah.
It's billed as the only true social e-reader.
Okay.
So,
Sounds like we all need to check that out. Margie, do you use it at, do you use it in your program?
Hi. Sorry, I'm toggling between this and a meeting on my campus. I've only heard a little bit here, but I have investigated. I learned about it last fall, and then when we went online, I just got too busy. But it actually seems like a really good thing to use for online and remote teaching. So the more I learn about it, I'll post on the community for TESOL and let everybody know. I don't use it now, no.
Thank you.
Great.
what, Alice?
Oh, I just wanted to say my students read more if I find material that makes them a little bit indignant. You know, something kind of upsets them, just a teeny bit. Then they'll talk more, they'll read more.
As you might imagine, that works at UC Berkeley too.
Does anyone know if these the chat entries will be available to us when this meeting ends?
If you go into the place where you would type a message, there are 3 little dots on the right-hand side. If you click it, you can save the chat. And it saves into a folder on your computer.
What, go into chat?
So if you're in the chat menu where you can see people's comments being written,
Yes.
and down at the bottom where it says type your message here,
yeah.
if you go all the way to the right hand of that box, there are 3 tiny little dots. Open it up and it says save chat.
Oh.
That's not how you do it on the phone,
when you
though.
save the chat, where does it automatically save it to?
Well, I think it's how you have things automatically saved on, like, where do they go on your computer when you automatically save things? But it is in a Zoom format kind of thing. So I find it in my downloads and I put it over in Dropbox and then I can open it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I think the host will automatically get a copy of it.
Yeah, Neil, on the
Only
Zoom, if you go,
you set it.
Oh, that's true.
Oh,
Yeah.
if you go on your documents, automatically there should be a Zoom folder, and then there should be all the logs that you have ever saved. So if you save this today, it will show up there.
Excellent. Okay. Very good.
So the 3 dots, at least in my Zoom group chat box, if I click on those 3 dots, it doesn't do anything.
Is your
That's
screen
interesting.
enough?
It's next to everyone, right? So on your chat
Yeah,
where it says
next to
everyone, then there are
Yeah.
3 dots. You click and an option comes just right down. It says save chat.
Okay.
But you're the host, so I'm sorry, I don't know who the host is. Lynn, you're the host who started the call? Yeah, so when this call is done, you can go to your recordings and you have several options: video with chat, or just chat. So you can post that on the My TESOL community for everybody.
That would be helpful.
Yeah.
Well, we're now at 11:02. This has been a great first reading vocabulary interest section hangout. I took a picture.
And Yelena posted the article, Neil.
Yes, I saw that and I've copied and I've got it up and ready to read as soon as we end this one. There's been some really good ideas and resources shared today. Tom will let us know when we're doing our next hangout.
Thanks, good. Tom, thanks for getting this set up. It's been very, very interesting and nice to see so many familiar faces and new faces.